Hi guys, and welcome back to another weapon comparison video. Today we're going to take a look at the damage difference between the Amos bow and the Skyward harp. Now, as always, we have a character with 100 attack, 0.7 attack speed, he has no artifact or any buff of any kind, and the skill damage percent that is used on the damage calculation is just 1. To make the math easier, if you want to calculate how much damage your character actually does, you just change the number you see here by the one you have. It's pretty simple. Now, we know that the Amos bow, it's a weapon with 608 attack at level 19, it has a 49.6 attack percent multiplier, so it translates to 1.49 and 6 multiply, and we just have an artifact in the total attack, this is at 0. And the total attack that we get is 1059. The damage is the total attack, so this one, that multiply the skill damage, that it's 1, that multiply the damage bonus. This weapon, as we know, has a damage bonus that is always applied of 12%, and for every 0.1 second the arrow is flying, the damage improved by 8%. So it's 12, then there's 20, 28, 36, 44, and 52. And this is the damage that we had with every damage multiplier. So the first one, it's the one you will always have in any case. And for every 0.1 the arrow is flying, the damage increased of 18, 19 nearly. And at max damage, it's actually 1609. So damage is actually nearly 500 more. It's not 500, it's a bit less than 500, it's like 400 and something, but there is a big difference. The main problem is that it's hard to get this max damage because you need to be very far away from an enemy, because 0.5 second, it's half of a second, so it's actually very fast. But the arrow in game is very fast, like you can hit an enemy, you can probably hit an enemy in 1 second more than 1 times, so that's to understand how fast an arrow is flying. And the other problem is that most enemies in the game will gap close you, so you need to be constantly sprinting away from them to keep the distance. It's actually hard to understand when you are in the max distance, and sometimes you don't actually want to be super far away from an enemy, because sometimes you want just to be near them. So this is one of the main problems of the Amos bow. So I think that most of us will probably have a 20, 28, 36% damage multiplier most of the time. This one are a bit hard to get, and I don't know if they are even worth at the end, because the more you are far away from an enemy, the less time you have to deal DPS. Because if you are super near an enemy, you can hit him with your arrow more times than if he's far away. Especially if he has, like, example, an immune phase. So, like Geo Hypostasis, for example, if you are near him, you can shoot multiple times, but if you are far away from him, by the time the arrow fly and hit the enemy, you will probably hit less time. And that's one of the main problems. You need to, and I don't know if it's actually worth to hit less just to do a bit more damage, or if it's worth to hit more and deal a bit of less damage. So that's one of the main problems of this bow. The Skyward harp is a pretty decent bow, because you need to understand that every character in the game actually starts with a 5% crit rate and a 15% crit damage. So when you start, for example, a new game, you could actually crit, even if you have no crit rate, artifact, buff, or anything. And you will do 1.5 times your damage if you crit. Now, the problem with the Skyward harp is that it has no attack multiplier and no damage multiplier, so the attack and the damage is the same. It's 100 plus 674, so it's 774. And these are two formulas that I found on the internet. The second one, that is the smaller and easier one, just calculate how much damage your crit do. So it's very simple, it's your normal damage that multiply 1 plus your crit damage percent. So 15% divided by 100 is 0.5, so it's 1.5 that multiply your damage. And the first formula calculate your average damage that you do with your weapon. So the average damage is lower than the crit damage, and it's higher than your base damage. The problem with this formula is that it works in a base of 100. So if we take 5% crit rate and 50% crit damage, this formula will say that in 100 attack, you will crit 5 times. And so it calculates the damage, your average damage, by saying that 95 of the times you do base damage and 5 attacks actually do 15% do apply the crit. And this is bad because, for example, most enemy like Hirluch on other enemies actually die way faster than in 100 attacks. They die like in 5 attacks, and with a 5% crit rate, you will probably never crit them. And so the number you get with average damage will actually be higher than the damage you actually do. So this formula will be like a liar. It will not tell you the truth. And the only way you want to use this formula if you have a good crit rate. So if your crit rate is actually 15% or more, you will apply this formula because that will give you an average damage that's actually close to the damage you actually do. But if you have a very bad crit rate, this formula will always give you, I think, a number that is always higher than the damage you actually do. So it's not worth. Just use this formula if you have a good crit rate, and that's what you want usually when you go crit rate. Now this bow with no artifact and nothing has a 27% crit rate, 0.1, and 70% crit damage, because it's 22 plus 5 and 15 plus 20% of the weapon passive. So, for example, if we apply the first formula, we get this number. But trust me, you will never do this damage because it's your average damage. But most of the time, you will actually apply this, and so it's actually hard to get this number, because you will never. This is the crit damage, for example, if we use this formula, and with a 5% crit rate, your average damage is actually pretty decent. But as I said, you will probably never crit, and so this damage is a lie, because the number you will always do is probably much closer than this one. And the other interesting part of this weapon is that, of course, if we see the damage and the crit damage, they are not very good, because this damage is actually lower than even the total attack of the weapon, and this is actually lower than the 28% damage of the house bow. But this weapon has a passive that deals 125% of your attack, and 120% of your attack in this case, it's 977. So the damage, your normal damage plus the passive, is actually much higher than this one. It's like 100 more, and the crit damage plus the passive reach the 2283. So it's actually like 400 more. No, it's even more. It's like 600 more. So the damage difference is actually a lot. But the problem of this passive is that it has a 15% chance of happening, and it can only apply once every 4 seconds. So I wanted to see if in the long run the Amos bow is actually better than the Skyward harp. And in 8 seconds with a 0.7 attack speed, we attack 11 times. And so the Amos bow, in the worst case scenario, so with using this number, does 13,046 damage. In the best case scenario, so this one, does 17,699 damage. And these are pretty decent number. If we take a look at the Skyward harp, I decided to use this scenario. So this one is actually one of the best scenario, because with a 27% chance of critting 3 times in 11 attack is actually a lot. So we crit 3 times, we do 8 attack that are just normal damage, and we apply the passive 2 times. I think that's actually pretty simple to apply the passive, because in 8 seconds, because we can only apply this passive every 4 seconds, but in 4 seconds we do 4.5 attack, no, we do 5.5 attack, and in 5 attack you can easily apply the passive, in my opinion, with a 50% chance. In 5 attacks, there is like, it's the probability of not happening is super low. You probably are super unlucky. The problem is that the damage I get is actually lower than the worst case scenario of the Amos bow. And that was a bit shocking, because I thought that at the end of the day, with the passive, the Skyward harp would probably be much better. And I don't want you to create a misunderstand, because I think that the Skyward harp is actually a very strong weapon, even better than the Amos bow. Because you need to keep in mind that when we do this damage comparison, we have no artifact, no buff, no talents on. But the Skyward harp actually need, and it's a must, you need to have a crit build behind it. So if you want to use this weapon, you must have a good artifact set behind it. So with crit damage, with crit rate, and if you have it, why not a bit of physical and attack percent? That will always help, but usually you want crit rate and crit damage, just because this weapon, of course, give you as a crit rate increase just by its passive. But it's nice because with a 17% crit rate and a bit of crit damage, of attack percent and physical damage bonus, this weapon can actually, in my opinion, do more damage than the Amos bow could do in the long run. But the only problem is that, of course, the Skyward harp it's not noob friendly, because you need to farm artifact, and usually you farm artifact very late in the game. So for most people, we probably never. So for especially new player, if you get this weapon, it's a bit meh. It's not super good because you don't have artifact and you don't have times to farm artifact, because you will farm probably other things. Because usually artifacts are the last thing that you farm, and you start farming them at adventure rank 45. The Skyward harp, and so the Amos bow, it's a bit more noob friendly because it doesn't actually need a good artifact set behind it to do damage. And I think that, of course, a good artifact set would improve the Amos bow damage, but I think that the Skyward harp, with a good artifact set, is actually better than the Amos bow. So this weapon is a bit more noob friendly. This one, it's a bit more for a min-maxer that want to farm artifact, and if you have a good artifact, it's actually one of the best weapons in the game. And this was all for this video. I hope that it was interesting and that it helped you understand the difference between these two bows a little bit more. See ya on the next video, and tell me, for example, what build you have with this weapon. Let me know in the comments what you think about this weapon. And see ya!